This is the VOA Special English Health Report. ADHD is Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. Government estimates say 3 to 7% of school-age children in the United States have it. Adults can also have it. People with ADHD have problems with paying attention, controlling their behavior, and being overly active. Now, a study has linked an increased risk of ADHD in children to exposure to some kinds of pesticides. The chemicals are known as organophosphate pesticides. They kill insects by attacking their nervous systems. Earlier studies have shown that some of the compounds cause hyperactivity and thinking deficits in laboratory animals. Researchers at the University of Montreal in Canada and Harvard University in Massachusetts did the study. It involved more than 1,100 children between the ages of 8 and 15. 119 of them were identified as having ADHD. The researchers tested all the children for products that break down from organophosphates. Maryse Bouchard of the University of Montreal and Harvard led the research team. She said, "The higher the level of pesticide residue in the urine, the higher the risk of ADHD in the children." The scientists reported that the risk of the disorder was almost double in children with high levels compared to those with no measurable level. They say exposure at levels common among children in the United States may increase the chances that a child will be diagnosed with ADHD. Maryse Bouchard says the study found that exposure could play a part in behaviors such as inattention and hyperactivity. But she also says the study does not prove that the chemicals cause the disorder. The researchers say 40 organophosphate pesticides are registered with the United States government. The chemicals are used to protect fruits and vegetables. They are also used to poison insects in other places, such as homes. Lynn Goldman is an environmental health scientist at Johns Hopkins University School of Public Health in Maryland. She notes that the use of pesticides, including organophosphates, is widespread in developing countries. Children come in contact with high levels of pesticides through farming. The study was published in the journal Pediatrics. And that's the VOA Special English Health Report.
This is the VOA Special English Health Report. Last month, we reported about a study that showed eating even a little less salt could greatly help the heart. The study was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. The scientists used a computer model to predict how just 3 grams less salt a day would affect heart disease in the United States. The scientists said the results would be 13% fewer heart attacks, 8% fewer strokes, 4% fewer deaths, 11% fewer new cases of heart disease, and $240 billion in healthcare savings. Researchers said it could prevent 100,000 heart attacks and 92,000 deaths every year. The researchers were from the University of California, San Francisco, Stanford University, and Columbia University. They and public health professionals in the United States are interested in a national campaign to persuade people to eat less salt. Such campaigns are already in place in Britain, Japan, and Finland. However, some scientists say such a campaign is an experiment with the health of millions of people. Michael Alderman is among the critics. He is a high blood pressure expert and professor at Albert Einstein College of Medicine in New York. Dr. Alderman says that eating less salt results in lower blood pressure. But he says studies have not clearly shown that lowering salt means fewer heart attacks or strokes. And he says salt has other biological effects. He says calling for reductions in the national diet could have good effects, but it could also have harmful results. He says there is not enough evidence either way. Another critic is David McCarran, a nutrition and kidney disease expert at the University of California, Davis. He and his team looked at large studies of diets in 33 countries. They found that most people around the world eat about the same amount of salt. Most of them eat more salt than American health officials advise. Dr. McCarran says the worldwide similarity suggests that a person's brain might decide how much salt to eat. Both Dr. McCarran and Dr. Alderman have connections to the Salt Institute, a trade group for the salt industry. Dr. Alderman is a member of an advisory committee, but he says he receives no money from the group. Dr. McCarran is paid for offering scientific advice to the Salt Institute. And that's the VOA Special English Health Report.
This is the VOA Special English Health Report. Malaria control efforts currently depend on things like chemically treated bed nets and spraying against mosquitoes. But scientists keep trying to find other ways to prevent the disease. A number of vaccines remain under development. Most contain genetically engineered versions of a few proteins from the Plasmodium parasite. Plasmodium is the organism that causes malaria. These modified proteins are designed to get the body's defenses to launch an immune response against the Plasmodium. But the parasite contains thousands of proteins. Another experimental vaccine includes a deactivated version of the entire parasite. Robert Cedar is a researcher at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases near Washington. So instead of picking out 1 or 2 or 3 genes, you have the potential for what we call breadth, generating an immune response that would be broad rather than narrower. Radiation is used to weaken the parasite so it cannot make people sick or get spread by a mosquito. To make the vaccine, scientists use the parasite at a time in its growth when the organism is called a sporozoite. The idea has been known since the 1960s. But Mr. Sater says a discovery by a researcher at a vaccine company cleared the way for progress. The major breakthrough here was that my collaborator, Stephen Hoffman at Scenaria, developed a method where he could isolate the sporozoites and purify them so that they could administer it as a vaccine to humans. And no one thought that that was possible. But no one knew either if the weakened sporozoites would activate the immune system to protect against malaria. So researchers tested it on volunteers and found that it was safe. But it was not very effective. Only 2 out of 44 volunteers were protected when bitten by malaria-infected mosquitoes. To find out why, the researchers tested the vaccine on laboratory animals. They decided that the problem was the way the vaccine had been given to the volunteers. It was injected into the skin to simulate the bite of a mosquito. Mr. Sater says it would have been more effective if it had been given directly into the blood. However, vaccines are generally given by mouth or injected into the skin or muscle. Having to inject it into the blood could make vaccination programs more difficult if the vaccine is approved for general use. For now, more testing is needed. A report on the testing appeared in the journal Science. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Presutti. This is the VOA Special English Health Report. The United Nations estimates that the world reached 7 billion people on October 31st. But no one can be sure. The United States Census Bureau does not expect the 7 billionth baby until March. Populations are growing faster than economies in many poor countries in Africa and some in Asia. At the same time, low fertility rates in Japan and many European nations have raised concerns about labor shortages. Population experts at the United Nations estimated that the world reached 6 billion in October 1999. They predict 9 billion by 2050 and 10 billion by the end of the century. China's population of 1.33 billion is currently the world's largest. India is second at 1.2 billion. But India is expected to pass China and reach 1.5 billion people around 2025. India will also have one of the world's youngest populations. Economists say this is a chance for a so-called demographic dividend. India could gain from the skills of young people in a growing economy at a time when other countries have aging populations. But economists say current rates of economic growth, although high, may not create enough jobs. Also, the public education system is failing to meet demand, and schooling is often of poor quality. Another concern is health care. Nearly half of India's children under the age of 5 are malnourished. Sarah Crow at the United Nations Children's Fund in New Delhi says these two problems could keep India back. The malnourishment means many children are unable to grow to their ability in school and later to earn money and pay into the economy. 1 of every 200 million children who start school, she says, only 10% complete grade 12. Mikhail Rakowski is the Director of Human Development in South Asia at the World Bank. He says the 7 billionth person was likely to be a girl born in rural Uttar Pradesh. Uttar Pradesh is one of India's poorest and most crowded states, with nearly 200 million people. He says reaching 7 billion people in the world is a good time for a call to action. He says public policy needs to become really, really serious about gender equality and about access to services. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Presutti. Check out voaspecialenglish.com, VOA's daily source of news and information for people learning English. You can also find lessons on the VOA Learning English page on Facebook. This is the VOA Special English Health Report. Tobacco companies are fighting efforts in the United States and Australia to make their products less appealing. In Washington, a federal judge recently blocked the Food and Drug Administration from requiring new warning labels on cigarette packs. Judge Richard Leon ruled in a case brought by 5 tobacco companies. The judge temporarily stopped a new federal rule to require large new warnings starting next September. These include color images, such as a dead body or diseased lungs. Simple text warnings now appear. Congress called for color images showing the dangers of smoking, similar to what Canada does. But the tobacco companies say the new requirements approved in June violate their free speech rights guaranteed by the Constitution. Judge Leon said the FDA could not require the new labels before a lawsuit against the government is decided. Some experts say the process could take years. The judge said he believes the cigarette makers are highly likely to win their case. He says the images are designed to appeal to emotion, rejecting government arguments that they are purely factual. He accused the government of trying to use the labels to promote an obvious anti-smoking agenda. The head of an anti-smoking group, the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, called the decision wrong on the science and wrong on the law. About 1/5 of American adults are smokers. The World Health Organization says tobacco kills nearly 6 million people worldwide each year. More than 600,000 of them are non-smokers who breathe other people's tobacco smoke. In Australia, tobacco companies want to stop what would be the world's most restrictive laws on cigarette advertising. Cigarettes could be sold only in plain olive green packages. Only the brand name and health warnings could appear. The new rule is to go into effect in December of 2012. Tobacco companies say the measure violates the Australian Constitution. They say it would unjustly reduce the value of their brand names and trademarks. Health Minister Nicola Roxon says the government is ready for a legal fight. She says the new rule will be a big win for families who have lost a loved one to tobacco-related illness. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Prasuti.
This is the VOA Special English Health Report. The Australian High Court ruled in August to support a law barring tobacco companies from putting their advertising logos on cigarette packages. The European Union is considering a similar ban. But a recent international study showed that some countries do little to control tobacco use. It found that the tobacco industry still has strong influence around the world. Researchers examined information about 3 billion tobacco users worldwide. They looked closely at tobacco use in 14 low and middle income countries. They compared this information with tobacco use in 2 developed countries, the United States and Britain. Gary Jovino is with the University of Buffalo School of Public Health and Professions in New York State. He was the lead researcher in the study. He says, tobacco contributes an enormous burden to the healthcare system in developed countries. He says that will become the case in low and middle income countries in the near future. In India, he said, it already has. The study found China has 300 million tobacco users. That is more than any other country. India was second with almost 275 million tobacco users. Dr. Jovino says the researchers found powerful pro-tobacco forces were active even in elementary schools. The China National Tobacco Company, he says, has supported elementary schools in China, dozens and dozens of them, and they use their support to promote propaganda about tobacco use. Dr. Jovino says this is the same as the government telling children to use tobacco to be successful. But he notes tobacco is in fact addictive and shortens lives. The study showed that governments and social traditions in many countries are open to influence from pro-tobacco forces. So the Australian court decision is considered important to those fighting to control tobacco use. Jonathan Lieberman directs the McCabe Center for Law and Cancer in Australia. He says the study shows everybody that the only way to deal with tobacco industry claims or legal threats is in court. Jonathan Lieberman said the decision was fantastic for public health in Australia and around the world. The study also found that unless urgent action is taken, about 1 billion people will die early in this century as a result of tobacco use. On average, each of them will lose 15 years of life. For VOA Special English, I'm Laurel Bowman.
This is the VOA Special English Health Report. A condition called atrial fibrillation produces an abnormal heartbeat. People feel their heart race and they lose their breath. It may last a few seconds, but it can get worse and worse with age, leading to a heart attack or stroke. Doctors generally treat atrial fibrillation with drugs. But a new study shows that another treatment may have better results for patients who were not helped by drug therapy. The treatment is called catheter ablation. Doctors place a long, thin tube called a catheter into the heart. Then they use radio frequency energy to heat the tissue around the catheter. The heat burns off a small amount of heart muscle. The goal is to block abnormal electrical activity in the heart. Researchers studied more than 150 patients who had failed to respond to at least one drug in the past. In the study, about 100 of them had catheter ablation. The others were treated with more drugs. There was a 9-month follow-up period to compare the effectiveness. David Wilbur at Loyola University Medical Center in Illinois was the lead author of the study. He says catheter ablation worked in 60 to 70% of the patients. By comparison, abnormal heartbeats returned in 80 to 90% of those treated with drugs. But Dr. Wilbur says catheter ablation is not meant to be the first treatment choice for atrial fibrillation. He suggests it only when drug therapy fails to work. The study appeared in the Journal of the American Medical Association. Doctors can also use catheters to open blocked arteries that supply blood to the heart. That happened in February with Bill Clinton. The former president had a procedure called an angioplasty. Doctors used a catheter and placed 2 mesh tubes called stents into a blocked artery to help keep it open. Bill Clinton was taken to a New York hospital on February 11th and released the next day. His heart doctor, Alan Schwartz, said the former president had been feeling pressure in his chest for several days. The American College of Cardiology says 1 in 5 patients who receive angioplasty has already had heart bypass surgery. That includes Bill Clinton. He had a major operation because of blockages in 2004. Doctors say it is common for heart patients to need new stents over time. And that's the VOA Special English Health Report.